Good morning. Stan Stahl here with Secure the Village, and welcome to our webinar. Today, we're really proud and pleased and happy to have Darren Mcelroy of CISA conversation on the cyber risk landscape. We're going to be talking about a number of things, what the threat landscape looks like, take a look at ransomware, things of that nature. So really happy, Darren, to have you with us today. Secure the Village. We are a community-based response to the cybercrime and privacy challenge. We turn people and organizations into cyber guardians from the living room, boardroom to the living room. And we're a 501c3. We're a nonprofit, and want to acknowledge with great gratitude the generous support of our platinum sponsor, Miller Kaplan. So this is the Information Security Management webinar. We are on the, it says second Tuesday, it's not. Try the second Thursday of each month from 10 o'clock to 11 in the morning, where we offer practical and timely real world guidance, not on Tuesdays, but on Thursdays. Can I blame it on daylight savings time having ended, something like that? But our focus is around executive management, boards, and information security managers. That part of the organizational hierarchy, if you will, and secondarily, of course, to IT managers, cyber attorneys, cyber risk managers, all the other players that have to do with information security. As I said, our guest is Darren Mcelroy. He's the Chief of Operations of the Cybersecurity Advisory Program of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a part of Department of Homeland Security. Darren leads a nationwide growing team of cybersecurity advisors, all providing risk management services and resilience services to critical infrastructure and others as well. With that, Darren, let me turn it over to you. We're so grateful for you to be here today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, let you share yours, and we'll be off and running. So thanks again and welcome.
Sounds great. Thank you. So as Stan mentioned, Darren Mcelroy, I recently transitioned to become the Chief of Cybersecurity Services based out of Region 6 in Texas. So wanted to talk a little bit about the cyber risk landscape and how how it impacts us in our day-to-day lives. Let's see here. Having a bit of an issue here. Give me 1 second.
Okay, sure.
All right. So before I get into the risk landscape, I need to talk a little bit about what CISA does, how we do it, why we are in the business we are in. We work with public sector, the private sector, government partners from federal all the way down to state, local, tribal, and territorial to help share information, build greater trust, and really focus on enhancing the resilience of our critical infrastructure. We do that through partnership development, information sharing, capacity building, incident management and response services. We do risk assessments, and we do analysis of those assessments. We work on network defense, particularly within the federal space, and also emergency communications for interoperability and operability purposes, particularly with state and local governments. We work across critical infrastructure sectors. We've got 16 critical infrastructure sectors, and those sectors are really one way to divide up the critical services that are provided by industry and state and local governments. Another way to look at it, we also have a critical functions list of key functions that help the country run. So we look at it both from critical functions, but also from the infrastructure sectors themselves. Mm-hmm. And the significance of critical infrastructure, right, is that we're facing evolving threats, right? We recently, a couple of years back, we started focusing in on elections because that became an emerging risk based on everything that was going on in the world. We've still got acts of terrorism, cyber attacks extreme weather, pandemics now. So we're really focused on helping to help build those bridges within critical infrastructure and the government to face some of those risks. As part of our work within critical infrastructure, we actually do a lot of assessments, and we take some of the data from assessments, we anonymize that data, and we look for trends. So I wanted to share a little bit about that critical infrastructure data, just to give you an idea of where we sit as a country. Because remember, we're talking about cyber risks. We're not just talking about threats. We're talking about the vulnerabilities of your organization to those threats and the potential consequences. So when we're looking at this critical infrastructure data, it gives us an idea of where the critical infrastructure is in terms of their overall risk posture, their ability to be resilient. We do this, one of the measures that we use is our cyber resilience review. And it gives you a broad-based set of not only guidance for the end user, but for us, it gives us kind of a broad-based understanding of where cybersecurity programs are within critical infrastructure, state, local, and tribal and territorial governments. You can do this on your own as a self-facilitated assessment, or we can actually help administer the CRR for you and provide you with a dashboard. We cover a lot of areas within the cyber resilience review. One of the primary areas we cover is asset management, just because you can't defend what you don't know about. But we also need to understand the requirements of those assets for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We cover configuration and change management, controls, external dependencies, that's that third-party risk, incident management, risk management, service continuity management, which is that, really that business continuity, disaster recovery piece, and situational awareness training and vulnerability management. The reason why I go through these domains is because we provide data back to you as part of those reports within those domains and also within the NIST cybersecurity framework. I also share it because the data that we have is divided up within those domains. Of the questions that we ask, which is an approximation of the NIST cybersecurity framework, this is the percentage of yes answers we get back of the practices that organizations are performing to improve their cybersecurity. So for risk management, right, if you're looking at the mean, less than 40% are yes answers by the mean. So, out of 100%, the performance here is pretty enlightening in terms of how organizations are positioning themselves against the NIST cybersecurity framework and defending their own enterprises. Another way to look at this is via maturity. Okay, this is actually a 5-point scale. We only show it up to 1.4 because, on average, right, organizations are not even hitting the #1 level of maturity, which is performs all of the practices that a cybersecurity, for cybersecurity. The rest of the domains are really focused on that maturity. So as critical infrastructure, again, big picture, not performing where we would be able to really functionally defend our infrastructure.
Yeah, that chart, if I might, Darren, that
Yes.
last chart, and I'm seeing the same kind of thing on the next one. It really says we're really woefully ill prepared.
And it's on average, the answer is yes. But looking at this right here, broken out by industry, financial services, heavily regulated, well-funded, mature. Okay, not performing 80s, 100% across the board, but typically financial services institutions are where they feel they need to be. Healthcare and public health, a little bit more haphazard. Some of these values are a little bit shocking for me because, in the healthcare sector, risk management is really the hinge on, where HIPAA compliance and the security rule are. So you would expect risk management to be higher. But again, communications also fairly well performing, a little bit mixed. When we start dropping down, though, what we see is energy, which again it's a very diverse sector. So this is not all regulated entities. Government facilities, transportation, and then even down further, right? We've got our emergency services, water and wastewater, and commercial facilities. Now, this is not a scientific snapshot. These are the folks that come to us to take their own snapshot, but it gives us some general trends on where the industry is.
So wouldn't you assume, though, on that those who come to you would be more prepared than those who don't, so that this represents, if you will, an upper bound?
It's mixed. Quite frankly, it's mixed.
Okay.
So one of the things that we actually see in the data when we break all the data out and kind of look at it and cross-reference it, governance is a huge driver of performance. Okay, now that shouldn't be surprising to anybody, but on the cybersecurity side of the house, sometimes that's lost. Everybody gets focused on the geek work, right? The hands-on keyboard, the pen testing,
Yeah.
all of that stuff. But the policies, the plans, and the measurement drive a significantly higher percent of practices being completed. So if you have documented policies, typically you're scoring between 70 and 80%, okay, across the percentage of practices performed. Documented plans, 80 and 90%. And if you have a measurement program that's actually going back and measuring how you're doing, 80 and 90%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you're not doing those things, you're hitting about 35%
Right.
based on what the data tells us.
And how does that track with the maturity levels, like with documented policies having 70 to 80% practices?
Policies, plans, and measurement are essentially the different steps on the maturity level. So once you get to the point where you're actually building repeatability into your practices
Mm-hmm.
and managing, that's where the maturity comes, but the maturity tends to drag the practices with it. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And just a few little charts here, just planning, asset management, right? If they have a documented plan, they're scoring over 80% of yes answers within the practices performed. Take a look at that green bar. That's across all of the different domains, that green bar. If they answered yes, they're scoring 80s, 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 all the way across the board, except for maybe configuration and change management and vulnerability management. Same thing with policy. This is just the asset management domain. But policy across the board drives those practices being performed. And then again, asset management for measurement. Okay. How measurement influences, it's pretty clear. You see greens all the way across.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge is that as we are looking at those risks, on the vulnerability side, on the practices that organizations are performing side, the lower level of practices, the lower level of maturity introduces greater risk to the organization because of the inability to keep up with things like patch cycles or, potentially training because people are misconfiguring things. So we're really, because of this, we have a very vulnerable environment amid a number of growing threats that we've been seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you either need a hacker in a hoodie picture or a pew pew chart in a cyber briefing. So this is my little laser beams across the world threat, but it's a global threat and it's a growing threat. And the actors are getting actually more sophisticated over time, not less. You still have the less sophisticated going after the garden variety vulnerabilities, but there's some very significant threat actors out there that are really driving home the sense of urgency. Nation states, right? Everybody's heard about Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. They pose varying threats for varying reasons. Most organizations don't really need to know exactly why Russia may be going after them or China may be going after them, especially if they aren't patching, right? Especially if they aren't doing the basic blocking and tackling. The threat actor is going to matter less because you're so vulnerable to the environment. But these different nation state threat actors have very sophisticated capabilities and tend to drive towards their own purposes, whether it's North Korea and trying to get money, right, because of financial issues, whether it's Iran trying to go tit for tat, or Russia, being really focused on nation state type tradecraft and influence operations and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But over time, the number of countries and the amount of countries that actually have a cyber attack capability has grown tremendously. There were only a few actors in this space in 2007, 2008, 2009, but it's become, to the point where now we've got, 30 plus countries, and this is actually old data. I'm sure it's higher than this, and the sophistication continues to grow.
Yeah.
It used to be a few years ago, you'd look at a couple of those threat actors and say, oh, I'm not worried about that country. It's time to start worrying about some of those countries because their sophistication is getting better and the tools are actually available to them to get sophisticated more quickly. Not to mention free training online. So when we're talking about these cyber attacks, who are the targets, right? You've got staging targets, and then you've got the intended targets. And basically what that all boils down to is you're a target, right? Whether or not you're the supplier for the big dog or you are the big dog, themselves. If a nation state's coming after you, it may be because you are supplying, somebody that they're trying to get into. It may be because you're a managed service provider and they're targeting them.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're just targeting you. The bottom line is that there's really no ground that's been unturned on this. If you look back at, everybody likes to use the Target example, but the medium business that was their refrigeration contractor, which I won't name, was the vector into Target. So, understanding where you are within that ecosystem and how critical your pathway may be to critical infrastructure is very important.
We're seeing, at least I'm seeing on the news, that MSPs are becoming targets because of the large numbers of customers they have, and ultimately the MSPs have the keys to the kingdom. Is that playing out statistically as well with what you're seeing?
Absolutely, and actually I'll get to that in a couple minutes. There's
okay. Yeah.
So Stan, you wanted me to talk a little bit about ransomware, just to level set everybody, right? Ransomware, malicious software or malware designed to access a computer and basically lock it up, right? Deny access to that system and lock it up until a ransom is paid. That definition needs to be updated a little bit because there's some new nuances that have come forward in recent year or so. But typically you're spread through phishing or unknowingly visiting an infected website, watering hole attack kind of thing. Pattern of behavior, right? You get the phishing email, somebody in your environment clicks on it or goes to the wrong site. It'll lock their computer, encrypt their computer, try to spread within the environment. And then once that happens, they request payment to get the information back. Typically now, though, there's a couple of variants that have been focused on actually releasing the data. So instead of just encrypting the data, they access the data, store it, and encrypt it so that if you have good backups, which we'll talk about in a little bit, if you have good backups, they will threaten to extort. They'll extort you basically by saying, oh, we'll release all of the information instead of just not giving it back to you. So it's kind of a dual threat now with some of these variants.
Yeah, I found that as a game changer when I first saw that in the news, because and you look at Blackbaud, who ostensibly paid the cyber criminals not to release the information they'd stolen, but how good can you trust them that they won't do that?
Yeah, and it used to be that you'd hear about ransomware and you'd ask the victim, "Do you have good backups?" And if they said yes, then you may be in business. Now it's not that easy. It's not that cut and dry. So anyway, different vectors of attack. They can use your remote access software, clicking on emails. In 2019, it started to be more common for them to compromise managed service providers. Especially if you have a level of sophistication where you can go toe to toe with some of these larger entities. Why are you going to mess around with individualized phishing emails that may or may not be successful when you can just get into the infrastructure?
Yeah.
A lot more bang for your buck there. Doesn't mean they're still not doing those whaling and those targeted phishing emails, but they get a lot more bang for the buck
there. To this point, one of our attendees, Alan Frankel, who's in the insurance space, saying that MSPs are increasingly difficult to insure because fewer insurers are willing to take on that exposure.
Yep. Yeah, a lot of exposure there.
Yeah. Mhm.
So, the critical infrastructure entities that we're seeing, at least from our perspective, getting targeted by ransomware, education, government agencies, both the federal, state, local, and tribal territorial side, healthcare, obviously, both critical in terms of getting that data back, keeping that data confidential, but also being able to utilize the equipment that may be needed for, whether it's medical devices or just the records that they're managing on a day-to-day basis for patient care and for patient outcomes. Energy and utilities, the retail sector and finance, right? Retail and finance is, kind of where the money is.
Mhm.
So they're really, really interested in going after those.
Sure.
153% increase of reported attacks between 28 and 2019 in the state, local, and tribal and territorial areas within those governments. 55% more than the same time period just in 2020.
Yeah.
And again, recent data shows a shift to the release of victim information in addition to locking it. So it's that double-edged sword.
So on
Yeah.
on that slide, what are things that just what do we know about? Since we're talking only about reported incidents and there's no law that says you must report an incident, uh, is there any way to get a sense of how much of the number of reported incidents reflects, oh, more people are reporting, there's not more crime, just more reporting, versus there's more crime and there's this amount of reporting as well?
Yeah, so there's the victim disclosure side, which is when the victim basically goes to the multi-state ISAC and SLTT's case, or to CISA directly and says, "Hey, I need assistance here." But this data actually is based on open source reporting, so that would be anytime it's acknowledged in the public domain, which tends to be a higher number than what's directly reported to us for assistance. I apologize. I don't know exactly where this chart came from. My guess is that it's from a Verizon data breach investigation report or
Mhm.
something similar to that. One of those products that comes out every year.
Sure.
They have very good data, and depending, the vendors all have very good products. But the bottom line is, it's not going away with this new wrinkle on collecting the data. It really does change the game, as you mentioned.
Yeah. Do you have any information? This was a question from Di Kriebel, one of our other visitors or viewers, uh, whether or not MSPs are being held more liable for uh, these breaches as well. And their second side of her question, is that an impetus to take IT and bring it back in-house instead of relying on MSPs?
Yeah. So on the liability side, I haven't seen any indication of that, but that's not an area that I monitor.
Okay.
We're focused more on kind of building the internal best practices,
Mhm.
whether it's for the MSP or for the company or the business.
Mhm.
The insourcing things is it's kind of an interesting dynamic, right? We've seen, if I can take a few steps back, if you look back to 2007, there was a thing that the government did called the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative.
Mhm.
Basically, the federal government woke up and said, wait a second, this is a big deal. We're getting robbed blind, both as a country and as a government. We need to step up our game here. And so in many cases, some industry had never quite caught up to that big push.
Yeah.
Some were well ahead of the government, like the financial sector. But the bottom line is there was that push to outsourcing rather than hiring and training and equipping. You've
Mhm.
also got the shortage of talent, which you guys probably familiar with. But the bottom line is that there was that push, and the question becomes, is the pendulum going to swing back?
Yeah.
And that's going to be availability of talent, right? Availability of training for that talent, because a lot of times what you see within kind of the hiring discussions that we've all probably been a part of, everybody's looking for a unicorn, right? They want somebody who's got 15 certifications, for an entry-level position, right? Or
Right.
somebody that's they want somebody to run their security operations center, but they've got unrelated certs attached to that because they copied and pasted from somewhere.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's a lot of great work being done with NIST and DHS on cybersecurity workforce framework that can help organizations target what talent they
Yeah.
need to actually bring in house. But the one thing that I would say about that is that, do you need to bring everything in house, right? What are you looking at within your business to say, okay, I did my business impact assessment, right? These are the most critical things within my environment that I need to protect as a business, right? Maybe you bring those most critical functions, those most critical IT security functions in-house, or maybe you use a different managed service provider where you have a higher level of confidence and maybe pay a little bit more because they do certain things. They have certain controls in place that you're more comfortable with. So I think that's a very good space to start looking at.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And if I can use just piggyback off of what you said on the workforce challenge, Secure the Village, we just had an invitational workshop on workforce. That was Tuesday of this week. This is the National Initiative on Cybersecurity Education. They have a special week on training right now. So we participated in that. And we at Secure the Village are have put together a working group to focus on what we're all involved in workforce development of one level or another. So we formed a working group to just let 1 + 1 = 100. Learn from each other and all. So
yeah,
we're excited by that. Yeah,
that's great. Just notable ransomware attacks, right? I mean, Sam, hit Atlanta. WannaCry, really big. 230,000 victims. NotPetya, which actually was used as a cyber weapon against the Ukraine. Maersk is, I think folks are familiar with.
yeah.
But the big one now really is this ransomware activity targeting healthcare and public health sector. And this is really an unfortunate development where Ryuk and Conti essentially, essentially the bottom line is not only are they targeting the healthcare and public health sector, but the techniques, the TTPs that they're using are increasingly sophisticated done in a way to where they can, they're modifying file names, they're changing things around to evade routine detection. So it's a real problem. We've got a really good product on our website, and I can point folks there towards the end. But really that helps with those TTPs and understanding what folks should be looking for, with these more modern and sophisticated ransomware campaigns, frankly. And I would say it's a new low, right? It's targeting healthcare and public health during a pandemic, specifically with regard to ransomware. I think that's enough said. Just by the numbers, right? Ransomware payments are about $1 billion. Cost of ransomware to US in 2019, $7.5 billion. That's both payments and downtime and associated issues. It's a global issue, and it's the growth is there. Public sector organizations getting hit, private sector. It's just not a pretty picture.
Yeah.
So what do you do about it, right?
Right.
So what, right? Yeah. Darren's talking here about ransomware again, right? Focusing on having good backups, right? Understand what your most critical information systems are and back those up. Store them offline, test the restoration of the backups. And not only that, have a proper backup strategy, right? Whether it's an incremental backup strategy, where you've got multiple copies somewhere, multiple points in time. Worst thing you could do is restore from backup, think you're good to go, but you actually restored the ransomware as well. Right. So maybe you have to go back a little bit farther. Maybe you lose a little bit more data, but you have to go back a little bit farther to actually get that ransomware off of your backups.
Yeah.
Prioritize and
Yep.
segment your most critical systems. Talked about this before, but understanding which systems are most critical for your business, segmenting those off, separate those off to the extent that you can from the non-critical systems, and then focus on those. Patch your systems and software. I would say it's even better to have a comprehensive vulnerability management process within your organization. We'll talk a little bit about that. Train your staff, not only on cybersecurity best practices for your IT folks in terms of secure configurations and all that, but also training your people not to click on those links. That user awareness is critical. Doing those phishing campaigns to help with that user awareness is a great thing. Application whitelisting, only allowing approved programs on your network, again, to the extent that you can. Do pen tests on your system and have a plan, right? Both for incident management and business continuity. All right. You need to exercise those plans. Leadership needs to be involved in the exercises so they understand what's expected of them and who they're going to need to turn to get good advice. Whether that's the lawyers, whether that's the regulatory folks, or whether that's the CISO. Understanding that is critical.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about recovery because this is often not done and often not well understood. You have your recovery point objective and your recovery time objective. So when you're doing your backups, you want to understand what your recovery time is. How long do you need to get your stuff back up and running, right? If you're in the financial industry, you're probably talking milliseconds, right?
Yeah.
If you're largely just running batches of data, maybe it's hours or days. The longer that recovery time, the longer that you can take to recover your data, the lower cost it's going to be for you as an organization. Same thing with the recovery point, right? Understanding what point you need to have saved in order to how much data you're going to lose, right? Essentially, are you going to have full replication? That's very expensive, right? Are you going to have very high availability, full replication? That's right there in the middle, and the cost is going to be pretty tremendous for your organization. But if you can afford to lose a week of data, right, and you can afford to come back up in days, you're going to have but you need to understand that for your own organization in order to kind of help drive that backup strategy.
Yeah. Well, and you're absolutely right on that point, Darren. One of the things that we find often, if you go back to that slide, is that the recovery time objective is a function of exactly what service are we talking about. Email, delivery to clients. You'll have different, and you need a business impact analysis ultimately on the service to see how long you can afford to be out until it becomes a problem for you. And of course, that's situational to every business we're finding, to every organization.
That's right. And that's, that gets down to, when we're talking to critical infrastructure, we get a lot of, how often should I do backups? How often should I do this? What should my, what should my control objectives for this be? And it's really comes down to them knowing their risk internally. It's not for us to say from the outside, it's having that maturity to understand it inside.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the key piece of it that we find. It's ultimately, and this webinar is an illustration of it, that in many ways, cybersecurity management is the conversation. It's let's talk about it. Let's do what you and I are doing, and the attendees on the webinar panel and all. When you go into an organization, it's the same thing. Let's talk about these things. The answers aren't out here; they're in here in this discussion that we have.
And one of the things that I've seen a lot is where you'll have an IT security shop that's completely divorced from a mature risk management process within the organization. So a lot of times IT and IT security haven't made their way into that risk management conversation.
Yeah.
Right. They don't have a seat on the board. They don't, they're not considered, part of that risk, but, increasingly it's starting to move in that direction, and having those risk management discussions, introducing that potential risk to leadership is really the key to having not only that seat at the table, but the appropriate budget and the appropriate personnel, appropriate training, et cetera, to be able to actually move the needle.
So, and that loops back to Alan asked a question earlier, typed it up here, and I've been waiting for the right time to kind of bring it in. But when you looked at all the data trends and how low those were on both what functions were being done and the maturity level of those functions as well, and we saw, you talked about how low those were. Is that a reluctance to invest in the tools? That's Alan's question. Is that why the trends are so low? Is it more that management doesn't understand the nature of cyber risk and what they have to do? You know, what's your sense of that?
From my perspective, it's all of the above, and I'll talk about it in terms of what I constantly hear. Right, I hear from folks that are frustrated that they can't get their budgets approved. And when I talk to them about it, they're talking tools, 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 right? I need this next generation firewall, and I need this, and I need that,
Yeah.
right? Okay, you do. You probably do. I believe you. Talk about risk. Talk about what happens, why it drives down that risk. So a lot of it is communication from, the technical folks who understand exactly what they need and why they need it, but there's a language barrier that doesn't penetrate the C-suite, right? So you're talking about a next generation firewall. They have a firewall. I'm not going to spend, a bajillion dollars on deploying this new thing when that thing has the same name.
Well, yeah.
And sometimes, frankly, you don't need that tool. I've talked to organizations that they'll have a certain next generation firewall deployed and they're paying for it. They're only using 40% of the features because they either don't have the capability, don't have the internal knowledge, but they bought the whole thing, right? Yeah. So understanding what you're trying to accomplish, right? Having those control objectives. I haven't really talked much about control objectives, but understanding what you're trying to accomplish when implementing your controls, right? Simplest example I usually give is there's a lock on that door. Why that lock, right? Is your control objective to keep unauthorized people out of the room? Okay, maybe you accomplish that. Is it to give authorized people 24/7 access? Well, that's a different control objective. That might be a different control. It might be a keypad, right? It might be a card access.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't need a lock on that door, right? But you bought it just because, you know what? We need locks on all our doors.
Yeah.
So having those objectives driving the investments ultimately will, in the middle there between investing and understanding, is that what kind of risk am I buying down?
Yeah.
That data is the conversation that needs to be had to get the investment. How am I driving down risk to the organization? Not that computer, but the business.
Yeah. No, and we find that what you just said is just so absolutely true. I mean, we had a situation where we had an IT vendor for a client of ours that proposed to the client that they buy a $50,000 firewall. It was, okay, here's what you need. And we did a risk assessment and we said, well, you'd get a lot more bang for your buck if you paid more attention to vulnerability and patch management and just live with the firewall you've got. It's that kind of understanding where the risks, the threats are, and okay, what are the right things you can do to mitigate those threats to your system, risks to your business, if you will. Where's the right place to put your money there?
So one of my last slides on ransomware here, just in particular, if you become a victim, there may not be a lot we can do to help, but certainly there, in some cases, there are decryption keys out there. There are some things that the FBI has been able to do and Secret Service. So it's good to reach out because there might be a sliver of hope. Especially if there's decryption keys out there. But if you're impacted, ask for help, work with experts, isolate the infection, review the connections. Where are you connected? Where could that ransomware propagate to? Could it propagate to your partners? Now you got another problem.
Yeah.
So then you got notifications and terminating connections and all of that sort of thing. And then prioritizing recovery and hopefully you have a good backup strategy to help with that.
Well, and I see that prioritized recovery, and I think to myself, well, that prioritization should have been done before the attack. You don't want
Exactly.
to be sitting in the boardroom trying to figure it out in real time.
You know, if you, a lot of work, and I'll get into this in a bit, a lot of organizations don't have an incident management plan. Okay. Shocking to me, but it's true.
Yeah,
Um, if you do have an incident management plan, having a ransomware playbook to help kind of step by step walk through what to do during a ransomware attack within your environment is probably a pretty smart thing to have.
yeah,
And again, to your point, preparing and responding before the incident and before you pay, obviously, the issue here is that you're not guaranteed to get your data back.
mhm,
And it also encourages the business model. We've actually had victims that get hit again because they've shown a willingness to pay.
yeah,
So it's just a nasty business to get into. You know, we're not in a position to say don't pay. At least traditionally we haven't been. The FBI is a little bit more on the don't pay side.
right.
You have to make a business decision,
Yeah,
but you need to factor in all of those different aspects to it, because you're potentially just increasing the attention. So if you do pay, you know, get on the horse and, you know, plug up whatever vulnerabilities caused this to begin with, because
yeah,
they're coming. This is a great page for resources on ransomware, CISA.gov/ransomware.
mhm,
You know, it's got bulletins, it's got best practices, a lot of good stuff on there, CISA.gov/ransomware. But I want to talk a little bit, because I started with data. I want to add a little data onto here, because we talked about some very specific practices that are related to ransomware. Least frequently performed practices within Cyber Resilience Review. Very few organizations are actually taking a look at their awareness and their training programs and checking to see if they're actually, effective.
mhm,
Right. So that might be, you do phishing, you know, you do training on phishing and ransomware, and then maybe you do a phishing exercise where you phish the employees and you track that over time to see how effective you're being. But you know,
right,
things like that are very helpful on the user side to help build that muscle memory. They need to know
mhm,
where to send that.
yeah. What are the references
Ask.
there? TA G2.Q3. What is,
Yeah, that's a training and awareness goal 2 question 3 within the CRR. It's just a reference back
got it.
to the
Okay.
document.
Mhm,
Vulnerability management, right? We talked a little bit about how important it is to have an actual comprehensive vulnerability management program. Um, you know, there's no, folks aren't putting together a strategy on how they're going to address their vulnerabilities,
mhm,
right? At minimum, what they're doing is they're getting information from the vendor and then applying the patches, although that doesn't even happen across the board. So what ends up happening is you forget to patch something one week, or somebody was out, and you don't have the rolling log that tells you that this has not been done. The practices are frankly shocking. We have a vulnerability scan that we can do for organizations, and it's unbelievable how many critical vulnerabilities remain unpatched.
yeah,
Scan after scan after scan. That, and it's not because they're looking at it and saying, "Oh, it's not vulnerable," or "Oh, that's not a critical service." It's they just don't have the capability and the capacity to actually do it, test it, et
mhm,
cetera, within their environment.
yeah,
Incident management practices, just over 50% of organizations have a plan for managing incidents, cyber incident management plan. So they're basically get hit and it's all new to everybody, or maybe it's not new to them because they, get hit all the time and still don't have a plan. But understanding how the incident is going to play out, how it's declared, who needs to be involved, all those things are very important, vitally important, especially if you're in a regulated space. Enough said.
mhm,
Service continuity management practices, that's business continuity piece. Recovery time, the last data down, that piece of data, are availability requirements such as recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives established. Just hovering around 40%. It means about 60% of organizations just pick a restore point, right? They haven't worked out what their RTO or their RPO need to be, and they're hoping that that's going to be effective and it's going to work. It's a little bit crazy.
Mhm.
Training and awareness adoption. Again, the bottom one is the effectiveness of the awareness training programs evaluated. I mean, that's less than 30% of organizations actually see. They basically deploy the training and, hey, check the box, met the regulatory requirement. We plugged it into our player and we can say we do it every year. But how effective is that click-through training that you do really, right? It tends not to be. So, not trying to beat up on organizations out there. This stuff is very difficult, and that's frankly why we're here, to engage, right, with you all. There are a number of resources and assessments that are available for you. Some are self-service, and some have long waits. Some are only available to critical infrastructure, but we can help walk you through those. The Cyber Resilience Review and the External Dependencies Management third-party risk assessments. The Cyber Infrastructure Survey, which is kind of a short survey led by the cybersecurity advisors, and workshops. We can come out and do an incident management workshop or a cyber resilience workshop. The cyber resilience workshop focuses on how to build a resilient enterprise. The incident management workshop focuses on how you would build a cyber incident management plan. Because we saw the data hovering around 50%, we decided we're going to put together these workshops, help organizations get on that path to building the incident management plan. And those are all regional resources. Those are available from folks in LA, the Bay Area, et cetera, and other cities throughout the country. We also have national resources, which are those phishing assessments. We have tabletop exercises. Once you get a plan, there are tabletop packages that you can use and an actual exercise team. And then we have our scanning service, a validated architecture design review, and a pen test, a remote pen test. Those last few are really, really tough to get. You have to be within certain industries, and those are high demand, low resource right now.
Right. Yeah, I look at this and I think that, I mean, on the one hand, this is phenomenal, particularly for critical infrastructure organizations and larger organizations as well, that can have enough almost gravitas, if you will, that, okay, it's worthwhile for you to spend your energies because you're limited in what you can do as well. I look at these and I think, okay, so the small and medium-sized businesses particularly are the ones most challenged by the lack of resources in some ways. And
so for a lot of organizations, the first step is going to be our cybersecurity essentials that's on the CISA website.
Yeah.
It's really focused on those first things that you need to do as a business owner to develop a cybersecurity plan of action for your business, to develop a cybersecurity culture, to build awareness. But really, the first thing is as the owner of the business or the executive within the business is championing the that cybersecurity culture and actually making it your own. It's very important, that leadership aspect.
Yeah.
For too long, it's been the folks in the basement running wires and trying to secure it, right? And I always talk about, we need to get it from the basement to the boardroom. If you're a small or medium business owner, you're the boardroom, right? You need to drive that change. You need to drive that culture, even if it's just simplifying everything that you're doing, or moving to a relatively secure cloud might reduce your risk dramatically. If you're selling pizzas, right, even if an MSP is breached, you may not be a target that they're looking for. So that's the cybersecurity essentials is a really good resource. So I wanted to open it up for questions. I've got my contact information here, and also if you're not in the LA area, you want to connect with somebody, a local cyber advisor at CISA.dhs.gov will get you to the right folks. That's manned by the Cybersecurity Advisor Program. and they're basically every day brokering those introductions to folks, within your area. So.
This has been so valuable, Darren. I just, uh, and what you just spoke about, we find this so much, the situation, the need for leadership uh, from the top, the fact that our language, Secure the Village's language, wanting to turn people into cyber guardians that have the awareness, the knowledge, the education, and the commitment to do what they need to do, whether they're simply, an employee in a company, they're a member of the board, or they're a resident. They've got a family to
Yep.
protect. There's still things that they should be doing in all of this. And the other piece, and maybe we want to spend a moment or two on it, it's just this language barrier. Because it's what you say tracks exactly with what we see as well. There's that disconnect. It's like, some are speaking a language from Jupiter and others are speaking a language from Neptune or something. They don't connect that
Yep.
way.
You need to speak business.
Yeah.
Right? As an IT security professional, you are there to support the business. And
Yes.
as frustrating as it can be, sometimes things don't go your way. Adopting the language of risk, adopting the risk culture of the organization. If you know that they're less risk averse in certain areas and more risk averse in other areas, frame the language in a way that the business will understand.
Yeah.
It's critically important. And back to the small and medium folks and the individual at home. The thing that is a little bit unfortunate when we're talking about cybersecurity is that cybersecurity for a business or a critical infrastructure, different set of risks than the home user and potentially even the small business. So all these great, and I love NIST, phenomenal resources. But there's been this thing about not writing down your passwords, right? Okay, got it. I don't want somebody walking through my space, lifting up my keyboard, and that's a no-no within the corporate environment. But if you're sitting at home and you're not, your risk is what? That some third party is going to break into your home and pull out your little book and steal your passwords? No, they'd be in your computer and out without even coming into your home. And if somebody's coming into your home, they're not stealing your password.
Yeah.
For the most part. So understanding the level of risk that you're at, and ultimately having very specific messages to certain segments of society about risk, about understanding what those risks are. The biggest issue to most home users is going to be they want their pictures, right? They want their bank, private. They want their insecure, right? They don't want to lose their pictures in the cloud or on the disk or whatever. The ransomware hits them, they're worried about things like that.
Yeah.
And there are different ways to mitigate those types of threats, different ways to train people to address them.
Right.
So not all best practices are the same, I guess.
Yeah. No, then that's a critical part of the dialogue as well. That and again, it goes back to what you talked about, understanding risk. Then and the passwords, writing down the passwords at home versus at work, I think is a good illustration of that. Here at home,
they're not the same passwords.
Yeah, right.
I can do a whole session on passwords.
But definitely, we should think about that. Your slides, can you make these available to us? We'll post them on our website.
I can. We'll talk about how much I can put on a public website. But,
okay. Yeah. In the meantime, the video, the power of the video, we are recording this, so that will be on the website. Okay, I'm going to bring it back to us first. Again, thank you, Darren. This is like so super valuable for us. I'm going to put us back on my screen as soon as I can figure out how to do that. Let's see. There we go. And now we'll go to my screen and talk about next month. upcoming webinars that we've got. One of the things we've been running for several weeks now, several months now, is a webinar focused to insurance brokers living in this space, both having to guide their own customers, their own clients into good cybersecurity risk management solutions, while at the same time being able to apply the same basic principles to their own brokerages. So we've had this brokers roundtable for a while. We're going to look next month at a case study of a breach. We've got Brad Merriman, Joe Greenfield from Merriman and Associates. Brad's a retired FBI agent, and Joe is a professor at USC, and they'll be talking about just helping your clients prepare for the inevitable. You're an insurance broker. How can you help them? Our financial services cybersecurity roundtable will be speaking with Liam McCarty on identity problems, and that's focused to the financial services sector. Their identity problems are, let's say, a little more sophisticated than certainly the normal, let's say, small business organization. We'll be back here in a month on December 10th. We'll be looking at the payment card industry's data security standard, DSS 4.0, and Scott Perangelo will be our guest. Scott's on the Cyber Secure the Village Leadership Council. One of the things I wanted to call attention to is sign up if you aren't already receiving our News of the Week and Weekend Patch Report. Sign up for that. It's free. Comes out every Sunday afternoon. It includes our events calendar, the cybersecurity news broken out into residents, organizations, and society, different sections. There's typically, we'll aggregate 25 stories or so. It includes a Weekend Patch Report for the small office, home office environment. So it's a good way for whether residents or small businesses to keep up with what needs to be patched in their organizations. And I always include in it a cyber cartoon. Humor helps the mind open up to things. So I like to do that. Beyond that, please join our village. Be a cyber guardian. We're at securethevillage.org. And it's an opportunity to call out for the residents. Dr. Steve Krantz's book, Cyber Guardian, a Secure the Village Guide for Residents. Steve is on our board, and we're very grateful for the book he's done. And there's a couple of webinars on our website that Steve and I did together, looking at securing the things for residents. We're coming out with a new website. It's not yet available, but will be, I would say in the next month, we'll have it live. We're right now populating it. Beyond cybersecurity, I wrote my first book. It's a book of essays called The Agnostic Patriot, A Citizen Searches for the Soul of America. And that's available on Amazon. So I encourage you to take a look at that if it interests you. And contact information, I can be reached at Stan at securethevillage.org. We've got Darren's information again here for you. So please don't hesitate to reach out either to Darren or to myself. With that, I want to thank everybody. Darren, you particularly, this is the second one of these you've done for us, and you are just a wealth of knowledge, so valuable, helping the community this way. We're truly grateful for your work.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Yeah. And with that, let's stop sharing and go to, we're about to be adjourned. So thank you all. Hope to see you at another webinar soon. Darren, again, thank you so much and we are adjourned.